Hello, parents. This is Anne Arundel County Public Schools, and you're listening to the Maryland Crabs Podcast.
Live from a grungy kitchen table located in Annapolis, Maryland's scenic and historic capital, it's the Maryland Crabs Podcast. With each episode, your hosts, Tim Hamilton, John Fernay, and the occasional guest will dive in and pick apart the stuff that really matters most to you. We're too lazy to actually solve any of these problems, but we can definitely stir the pot. From schools, politics, parking in the fire lane, to those horrible people who drive BMWs. And here with this week's episode, live from the kitchen table, Tim Hamilton and John Fernay.
It's the Maryland Crabs, and we're here at Caliente. That means awesome.
I did not know that.
And that is my friend Jared Littmann, who does not know his Spanish.
This is true.
Actually, it doesn't mean awesome. It means cerveza, which means beer. I'm drinking a Modelo. I said surprise me, and that's what she brought me.
Did it surprise you?
No. I'm never surprised by a beer. It's lost the ability to surprise me.
She asked for a surprising beer, and she brought you a beer, and that met your goal.
Right. Yeah. So Jared is the owner of K&amp True Value here in Annapolis, and he is also the former alderman of Annapolis.
Ward 5?
Ward 5 alderman, and you look much more rested than you did like a year and a half ago.
Well, probably this time a year and a half ago, I'd probably still be at home catching up on emails.
Yeah, I have them out late too. It is like 9:15, which for me is like my day is just beginning because I'm a night person, and Jared's looking at me like all bleary-eyed right now.
Yeah, we're about to hit my bedtime if we don't wrap this up soon.
And we're not gonna. That's why the beers are going to keep coming. But you're drinking water with lemon because you're feeling wild.
Yes, exactly.
So the reason I have Jared on is because we actually got talking last week where Jared kind of emailed me and he said that he was going to testify about the minimum wage bill that was going through. And that's called, what do they call that?
It's House Bill 166 right now. There's also a companion Senate bill.
And it's called the Fight for 15.
Well, that's what the advocates for the legislation.
Right.
That's their march.
And that means, of course, is the $15 minimum wage here in Maryland. And right. I know that in Montgomery County, it's already 15. In Prince George's County, it's 11.
I don't know where either jurisdiction is at.
It would be great if you came prepared. That's all I'm saying.
I didn't know that one, but I will also throw something you didn't expect.
All right.
That in both of those jurisdictions, they also have exclusions that the state of Maryland does not have in its minimum wage, such as young employees are excluded from both of those counties' minimum wage laws.
Right, because that's the argument. Because I mean, you make no secret, you're a Democrat, and you would be probably liberal or at least left.
On many social programs, I'm progressive, and whether you want to say liberal or not, I'm progressive and often aligned with the Democratic Party. And I'd say on fiscal responsibility issues, I'm not always aligned with the party. But
I don't think you can say fiscally conservative anymore.
I don't like the term fiscally conservative
because it doesn't exist.
Well, it does exist, but I think there's a difference.
Well, conservative with a small c. Well, I guess it would be small c anyway. But
fiscally conservative and socially liberal to me means you support people of different, say, gay marriage. You support gay marriage, but you don't necessarily want to put money towards social programs that require money to exist.
So you could go to a gay marriage, but you don't have to spend money on a gift.
Well, you wouldn't want the government supporting various welfare types of programs. To me, that's a lot of fiscal conservatives mean they don't want the government to spend money, but they're okay with people doing what they want to do, that as long as it doesn't affect them.
Right,
which isn't a bad thing. I'm just saying I would choose to say I'm fiscally responsible and that I would support some social programs as long as you're not just borrowing money to do it, you're not taking out bonds, you're not mortgaging the future to pay for those programs that need to get paid for today.
So the federal minimum wage is $10.10?
I think it's less than that. It's like, no, the state minimum wage right now is $10.10.
Oh, okay.
The federal minimum wage, seven something. And I haven't paid attention to the federal minimum wage in so long because Maryland's minimum wage has exceeded it for, frankly, the entire time I've run the business, or at least the past number of years.
Most of the blue states probably have higher minimum wages. I don't know, what I'm just guessing.
Well, certainly the states that are in the news about their minimum wage are all considered blue states: New York, California, Washington, D.C., and there's some other.
Washington State. And
I think they're right. Yep. And Seattle is actually going backwards. So my understanding of Seattle and Washington is that they had a minimum wage increase, but they've seen so many problems with it that they're now backtracking off of it.
Yeah, I was looking at that, and let's say this. It says the 2017 study of Seattle's minimum wage hike showed that 9 months after it rose to $13 per hour, about 5,000 low-skilled jobs had disappeared. Right. And the number of hours worked dropped by 3.5 million hours, and overall wages dropped by 6 million. And that was just Seattle.
Right. I think a conversation about minimum wage should start with, what is the problem that you're trying to address? And what I mean by that is I do agree that there is growing income disparity between high income and low income. And so if that is the problem that you're trying to address, you really got to question, is raising minimum wage the most efficient solution to that problem? And I don't really think it is. I think minimum wage is the answer to the question of, do you have rampant unemployment that is so bad? And that's why minimum wage was first created in the 1930s. It was Great Depression era. You had high unemployment, 20% and above, and employers were able to treat employees very badly, pay them pennies, because if they didn't accept that low wage, the employer could fire that person and bring on somebody else, because there were plenty of people that were itching to take those jobs. That does not exist today. Unemployment now is historically low numbers, below 4%, depending on what area you're talking about. Certainly Maryland, it's historic lows. So to the extent that minimum wage is supposed to be the answer to a problem with low employment rate or high unemployment, minimum wage certainly has merit to address the problem of high unemployment where employers have so much power and employees have so little power. I don't think minimum wage is the answer to the problem of huge gaps between low income and high income.
Because the minimum wage right now, so if you had a $10 minimum wage and you're working and you're full-time, which would put you at, 2,000 hours. So that would be $20,000,
yeah,
which is
below, rounds up about 21,000. Yeah.
Right, and that doesn't include your anything with benefits, or it doesn't include overtime. So even with a $10 minimum wage in an area like Maryland, you're going to be below the poverty rate significantly. So you raise it by $5, and all of a sudden that puts you at what, $28,000,
roughly $30,000.
Yeah, so 30, which still, for family even of two, that's not going to be.
So all good points. My problem with what you just said is you're describing families, people who are working to support families making minimum wage,
and that this is the crux of the counter argument.
Yes, and those. I'm not suggesting that there's no one out there trying to support a family on minimum wage. But a vast majority of people making minimum wage, I don't want to even say vast majority because I don't have any numbers to back me up. A significant portion of the people making minimum wage are working entry-level jobs. And that's my main concern, that you have so many people making that are making minimum wage at entry-level jobs. So we're talking, could be 15 years old, coming to their first job. I'm often someone's first employer, and I'm teaching people, or my staff and I together, we're all teaching people how to work a job, how to talk to people, how to answer phones, how to dress appropriately, how to report to work on time. And those people are not producing revenue to justify a $15 pay rate. And that's ultimately how people's salaries are often dictated. What is the value that person brings to the business? How much revenue are they producing? Because ultimately it's that revenue that needs to make that payroll. There's no one running a business that just has so much cash they don't do with, and they just throw money at payroll. It's tied to people's responsibilities, people's experience, and ultimately, what's the revenue that person is generating? And when you have a 15, 16-year-old working their first job, they often aren't bringing the revenue to earn very much. Often it costs money. You've got to train them. That costs money. If you're a business that offers benefits, then you not only have their pay, you have the employer's matching payroll taxes, and then you have your benefits, whether you're offering health insurance or pension expenses, you're offering bonus pay. There's lots of other benefits that aren't calculated into the minimum wage calculation.
So that's the argument right there, is when you're talking about the younger workforce who's taking these jobs. And you and I talked about a little bit about this using McDonald's for an example. They're a first job for many people. They're a major corporation making billions of dollars a year, but it's based on paying people around minimum wage, around there, except for their managers. And even their managers, assistant managers, don't make a lot of money.
Right.
But restaurants are a little bit different. So I know that...
particularly that model, because a fast food restaurant like McDonald's, they don't have waiters and waitresses that are making tips, for instance. So they essentially have runners. They have order takers and they have runners for their food. And that's a very inexpensive way to run a restaurant. And they have a lot of automation now. You go through McDonald's drive-thru or go into a McDonald's, you're starting to see tablets and other mechanisms to start ordering your food.
It's horrible. I never go, and not for the reason you think, because I'm sad that people are out of work. I'm sad because it inconveniences me. And I never eat fast food. I hate it. But we were coming home the other day, and my daughter, it was late, so we had to throw something down her throat because she was just complaining nonstop. So we stopped at McDonald's here on Bay Ridge, and I never go to McDonald's, so I don't know the lingo. So I go inside, because I'm not going to do the drive-thru, because the drive-thru snakes around the building, and they have those kiosks there now. And I went to the kiosk and I was so confused I was embarrassed. I just, all I wanted was 2 orders of McNuggets, 2 fries, and 2 sodas, but you had to order them separately. And I wanted to kick somebody.
Well, yeah, that business did the calculation of how much does it cost to pay somebody to do all those things, and how much does it cost to have an automated service. And it was less expensive to provide automation. Now, if you raise minimum wage currently in Maryland at $10 an hour to $15 an hour, you're going to see a huge increase in transition to automation.
But wouldn't you see that anyway? And that's my argument with people, and I'm not defending it because actually
I don't think you would.
I think if you can save money by having automation, don't you just do it anyway?
No. So
that's
now
look at Giant. Because
I'll use my store as an example. My store is based on high customer service interaction, so that when you walk into the store, you have people to talk to, someone to ask questions to, people to get help for. That's the model. It's not the only model for a hardware store, but it is the model we choose. And if automation was available, frankly, automation is available today, but we don't take advantage of it because we want to keep that high customer service model. But there's big box hardware stores that go to automation, self-service checkout lines. That automation is available to me too, but it's not the model of business that we're talking to. You go to a $15 per hour minimum wage, every retail store, every restaurant is going to have to redo the calculations of, does it still make sense to have this many people working here, or does it now make more sense to have automation?
Well, I think also you look at what you expect as consumers. Do you want something that's cheaper, or do you want convenience / customer service? So if I go to your store, generally it's a knowledge-based store. Everyone's going to have questions coming in. Does this fit? What does this do? How do I stop this leak? So you have to have knowledgeable people there. And for you pay those people more money than you would like the people who load stuff into your car or check out, because they're producing revenue for you.
Exactly.
Right. So if I go to Giant, and Giant started this, and all grocery stores started this about 10 years ago, where they had the self-serve lines, the self-checkout. I always saw at the time, remember when you used to have baggers, and you had a cashier and a bagger, and they would check you out, and they would bag, and they'd go, and you would be gone. Then they started having the cashier's bag at the same time, which was very difficult to do. Now I'm going to the self-checkout, and I'm just at this point going, are you going to eat my food for me too? I'm
right.
doing everything. But it's normal now.
Yeah, it's a different model. And if people want that kind of automation, that automation is possible. And we'll see. If people want to support this high-level minimum wage, I think that's a vote for more automation. It's just a reality. It's not just legislation to raise the minimum wage to $15. It's to raise it to $15 and then increase the minimum wage by CPI, Consumer Price Index, every year thereafter. So here's the scenario that is not hard to envision happening. Minimum wage goes up to $15 an hour. Stores need to raise their prices so they have more revenues to pay for the higher wages. You now have a period of inflation where, because prices are higher, people are paying more. That's what Consumer Price Index is. So now you have the wages causing an increase in CPI, and now that you have a higher CPI, well, that minimum wage legislation says that minimum wage has to go up. So you go to $15 an hour, that causes CPI to go up. Now you're forced to go to $16 an hour. That causes more prices to go up and inflation again. And you end up in this cycle where you haven't accomplished anything. Again, what's the problem that you're trying to identify? Are you trying to change what entry-level employment is supposed to be? I don't think that's the problem that they're trying to solve. If your goal is to address the income disparity between the essentially disappearing middle class, this is not the best solution. This is just a blanket change in law that's going to affect some of the target audience that you're trying to help, but it's also going to have huge amount of unintended consequences.
Now, is this going to, and I don't know, but does this impact like lower income areas? Let's use the McDonald's model, for example. So in affluent areas or the suburbs, I'll notice that most of the people who are working at McDonald's, anecdotally, or your fast food, they tend to be kids, teenagers. But when you move into more urban environments, they tend to be adults, because for them, they're living in subsidized housing or public housing. So for them, they're sliding into these jobs that they're not making but $20,000 a year, if that. Right. I don't know what the benefit situation are. I don't think you can't apply that to the entire country, because there's going to be different models, when it comes to how it's going to affect people. Maryland's a relatively affluent place, but it's got pockets of poverty. Think about the Eastern Shore, Western Maryland, Baltimore, or parts of Baltimore. And those are the areas that are probably going to be impacted by this, and those businesses.
So Yes, so I think you bring up a lot of good points. First of all, throughout Maryland, you have lots of different types of jurisdictions. You have cities, and you have counties out towards West Virginia and Pennsylvania that are only miles away, and you have businesses only miles away from those two state borders that are going to have a much lower minimum wage across the border. So if you're a business, you'd want to move your business to West Virginia or Pennsylvania. If you're an employee, then you want to come from Pennsylvania or West Virginia to get your job in Maryland and then go home at night back in your state.
And that's what they said here. So I was looking at Forbes, and they said that of the 50 states, Maryland is 32nd in the cost of doing business and 43rd in regulatory environment. Virginia, on the other hand, is 5th overall for doing business and 2nd in regulatory environment. Maryland's corporate income tax is 8.25 and Virginia's 6. So looking at those numbers, Virginia is a much more attractive place to do business. That said, Northern Virginia is not going to be any less expensive for living than you're going to have with suburban Maryland. So you'd be talking about more areas, probably West Virginia and Pennsylvania for the most, and Delaware.
So here's my solution to all that. And again, it's really important to start with what is the problem you're trying to solve. So if you're concerned about the adults who don't have job opportunities and are working at McDonald's and trying to support a family on that salary, you have identified a problem. You want to help those people. So why do a blanket, everybody gets paid $15 minimum wage order, which has huge unintended consequences? Instead, what I would suggest a government do is identify the subgroups or the groups of people that you want to help and come up with a way of providing direct support to those people. And that way, that does multiple things. Number one, if you target your legislation to provide subsidies, like a minimum income type of legislation I'm talking about, or
that's been experimented. Like they do that in Scandinavia. They've tried a few places.
And so there's lots of ways you can try to do.
Explain that real quick for people.
So the concept is, and again, there's lots of ways to go about this. So just generally, the minimum income legislation would provide essentially, if you were working, you would at least earn X amount of income, and it's. The countries that you mentioned are socialists, have socialist leanings.
Like,
Exactly.
We're talking about, I think Finland and Norway have both
and
tried
so
this.
I'm not arguing now for or against it, but I'm trying to suggest that if that's the problem that you're trying to address, it's a much more targeted way to solve your problem of giving those people more money from the government coffers. But a huge second benefit that would have over minimum wage legislation is this. In that sense, all taxpayers, all ratepayers are paying into that fund, as opposed to minimum wage legislation. It's mostly going to affect some businesses, but not all. So a ice cream shop that essentially only has minimum wage employees is going to be hugely impacted by minimum wage legislation. A doctor's office has essentially no impact or very minimal impact with the change in minimum wage. Why should those two businesses be treated differently by the government to support that guy working at McDonald's or wherever, whatever other audiences constituencies that you're trying to support with money? Instead, have a tax. Use your tax base and use that collective money that everybody's contributing towards and put that towards whatever groups you're trying to support.
And the argument would be that you're supporting them anyway. You know, it's just through different manner, but you're giving them basic.
You avoid all the unintended consequences, not all, but you're avoiding a significant number of unintended consequences by making everybody pay a minimum wage. Because it's going to be very circular. You raise the minimum wage for certain people, and any business that has minimum wage employees then has a ripple effect of where they have to raise salaries for everybody else. That's going to cause a huge amount of inflation. If everybody's making more money, then everybody's getting paid more money. The money has to come from somewhere. Businesses usually have a structure, and in the hardware industry, payroll is generally around 18 to 22%, let's say. In different industries, it's different. If you don't live within those norms, you're going to go out of business. So if you're going to stay in those norms, you have to have more revenue. And to have more revenue, you've got to raise prices or some other way get more sales.
Do you know what the labor to goods is in the floral industry? I just found out 60%.
60% is labor?
60%. Yeah. So you're making $100, 60 of it's going to labor. That's why you see so few florists.
So every business has that. And so, like the government, the city of Annapolis' budget, 80% goes towards salaries.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
Is that typical for government?
I don't know. I have enough data.
Because that's
really
salaries
that.
and benefits and retirement, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. It's all those. All goes towards keeping your personnel.
So I'm thinking, so now we're talking about scale. And this is where it gets interesting, is because if you came to me 20 years ago and you said, hey, I think that we should raise the minimum wage, I'm like, hell yeah, we should. All these corporations getting rich and, people, there's a huge gap between the CFOs, CEOs, and the employees. But it wasn't until about 20 years ago when I started working with smaller businesses that I saw it at ground level and I saw the arguments, because I always pictured the people who were fighting against the minimum wage were, the Walmarts and the
fat cats.
Exactly. Well, so I've changed my view of this because it's a complex issue. Amazon's minimum wage is $15. They switched last fall. Walmart's increasing the minimum wage to $11. Costco already pays $14, and Target plans to go to $15 an hour by 2020. So those are the fat cats we're talking about. So I took it a step further, and I was thinking about, okay, so Maryland is per capita the wealthiest state in the country, which would make it the wealthiest state anywhere. Again, we have pockets of poverty. And when we're talking about Maryland, about the wealth in Maryland, it is centered in about 5 counties. We're talking about Montgomery County, Prince George's County, Howard County, Anne Arundel, and then Frederick, actually. So if I go to the Home Depot here and I buy siding and I pay X amount of dollars, if I go to Utica, New York, which pays probably half to maybe a third of the rent that the Home Depot does here, assuming that they lease the land or what have you, I'm paying essentially the same amount for that siding, because that's what they have to have a certain margin, and that's what they're buying it for. And but since they don't pay as much in rent or leasing, then they're more profitable than the ones would be here, and they have to make it up in volume here. So paying someone more here is a lot bigger deal than raising the minimum wage in Utica, New York, where they can absorb those costs a lot easily. Right. So you would say, well, the big companies, they can spread that cost because it all comes out in the wash. So you say, all right, if they raise the minimum wage in Maryland, then it doesn't matter because we have Iowa and Nebraska and all those to cover us. Whereas you have a single location here in Maryland.
I think your argument certainly has merit, but
damn right.
But I think even if in a much smaller picture, the point is the same. If you just compare, if minimum wage went up, and it would affect, in my store, we have under 10,000 square feet, and we have something like 23 employees. If you calculate that ratio of employees per square foot, and you look at the Home Depot, also in Annapolis, you're going to find a much different number. You're going to have a 100,000 square foot building, and I don't know how many employees, but it's
3. They have 3 employees in the Home Depot.
It's going to be,
trust me, I've looked for them.
So I shouldn't use a specific name, a specific business name. But my point is, any of the big boxes, you're going to find a much smaller number of employees per square foot in those big boxes. Their total personnel is also a much smaller percent of their revenue. So the number I gave before, 18 to 22% for payroll, that's for typical independent hardware stores. In a big box, it's a much smaller number than that. So just by $100 sale in my store, $20 of that, using round numbers, $20 of that is going to go to payroll. $60 of that is going to the goods, and then you have rent, and you have utilities and everything else chewing up essentially the last 20%. Hopefully you have some couple dollars left over for profit. In a Home Depot, you might only have $15 of that $100 sale going to personnel. So if just that personnel cost increases by some percent, it's going to have a smaller impact than the same percent increase on my $20 portion of the $100 sale.
Well, and that's kind of a rookie mistake I see. Not that I'm a business thing that I don't know of right now, but it's
entrepreneur.
Yes, but that's one of the mistakes I always see when I see a new business open where they have so much staff, and you would think that that's a good thing, but I'm just sitting there looking at all the staff and it's like you ever been in a taxi before Uber and you could feel the meter running and you're sitting in traffic and you just feel that money ticking away? And I think every business owner has seen that on a slow day. They're looking around, their employees have nothing to do, and you just feel that money flying out.
That's why it's so much harder to start a business than to take over an existing business or buy an existing business.
Yeah, and there was a business I saw who opened up in Annapolis about 12 years ago. It was a butcher shop. And not Mike Smollins, who was a great guy, but this was another one that was over off Riva. They had great product. I love what they did, and it was fantastic. But I remember walking in for that first month, and they had like 10 employees in this place that was the size of this room, and you're not here to see the size of the room, but it's too small for 10 employees.
Yeah.
And there was like 2 customers in there. And I was like, look at all this money right now. And that's a rookie mistake. And I saw that, frankly, a little bit in the market house. And we mentioned that before. So I'm not, and Jody knows more about business than I'll ever know. So I think in the beginning you have to front load a little bit. But sometimes I'll go in there and I'll see all those employees. I go, that's great for the customer, but I'm a little nervous for the business model.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. The huge area of this conversation that we haven't touched on yet is online shopping. And obviously every year, every company says a greater proportion of their sales are coming from online shopping. Well, the online shopping experience is not very labor intensive. I'm not saying it's labor absent, but it just requires much fewer people. You don't need the expert knowledge. You don't need the guidance of you should get this versus that. The customer is left to themselves to figure out what they need.
It's very mechanical.
And the labor you have is for shipping. It's for handling returns. It's significantly less labor intensive. So we all know people shop online. A portion of people's sales are moving from brick and mortar to online sales. Online companies, suppliers, wouldn't have a huge impact to their bottom line if minimum wage went up. So now if you have a store that's providing a product and their personnel costs go way up and they're trying to recoup the revenue or make up the revenue to pay for that, and they've got to raise their prices, and now you have that online item who barely saw a blip from that change in minimum wage, doesn't have to raise their prices. Well, now the online experience just got smaller compared to the brick and mortar store, and you're going to lose more shopping. And what happens if businesses have less revenue and they have less transactions? Guess what? They're going to have less payroll. They're going to cut heads, because they can't sustain the same number of people if they have a lot less business.
I know it's cliche right now, but you look at the Amazon effect, and it's hard to believe it's only 20, it's like 20 years ago. Remember when they first started, they were just doing books.
Right.
And now you can buy anything online. I just bought something on B&H the other day, and everything is done online, and they call it the Best Buy effect, is where you go into Best Buy, you check out the device, the electronic device, you fool with it, and you go and you order online.
Right.
Although, it used to be you got the best deal on Amazon, where now you do have to shop around because it depends on where you live, actually, because they have dynamic pricing, so they can charge people in different places in the country different prices, which I think is unfair, but it's their business model.
I know I have things less expensive in my store than you find on Amazon. It's Amazon is not always the lowest cost.
No, they're not.
provider.
They used to be, but not anymore.
But online shopping is obviously real. It grows in effect for every year
because of the convenience.
Yeah,
and it comes down to that. And it's and I've heard horror stories about the people who work in the warehouses and what they're doing.
It's the convenience and assumption that they're the best price.
Well, and we've talked about this. You have an independent store, and most people independently owned store, and most people think that, well, I'm going to shop the local stores, and because I may not get the best price, but I'm supporting a local store. And frankly, that's not to make it a commercial, but I mean, that's not usually the case.
Certainly in some instances it is, but I shop online and I shop big boxes to make sure that my customers are getting the best price on hundreds of items, period.
Right. There's an immediacy to it. When it comes to your business, is that I've seen the kids come and go for 20 years at your store, where you have the same loaders, the same cashiers. Some of them I got to know their names. Some, were there for a weekend, and, but as a matter of fact, one of my coworkers I work with, she goes, "Oh my God, I worked there for 2 years." And she goes, "My brother worked there." And it was just, and she had stories about it. And is that guy still there? Well, that guy who's still there, yeah, he is still there. And that was when she was a child. Now she's a professional.
Right.
And that guy's still there. And the reason he's there is because we talked about is he makes more than minimum wage because he generates revenue for the store.
Yep.
And I think that's differentiation that we have to make and say, looking at this, not just the small businesses, because, McDonald's is, it's a corporate business, but it's owned locally. It employs local people, and I'm always one to kind of shit on them. But even these chains employ local people, and a lot of them are locally owned. So when you look and say, all right, how is that going to affect them? Because like I said, 20 years ago, I would have said, raise that minimum wage. And now, and not for the reasons that I'm not looking to say, well, they're going to start laying people off and they're going to start canning people, because you have to have staff to do that. But it's going to be less convenient. It's going to hurt local people. It's going to hurt the local business owners. So, I mean, I guess I've evolved on this. I guess I just didn't like the way I was being told this. When I was watching like Fox and Friends, and they're just shaking their head about what it's, when they're wearing their $1,000 suits or $2,000 suits, telling you what it's going to mean. Right. But then you talk to a local person about it, and you see how it's going to affect them.
It's scaring a lot of small business owners. Most small business owners that I know, they're keeping their business alive and they're making some money, but they're not swimming in it. That they have all this extra revenue coming in where they can just sustain a higher minimum wage and not affect their business.
So that's almost a 50% jump.
Yes, like 48%.
Yeah, that's in what, by 2023? So that gives
it's $1 a year. But like I said, it won't. You got to keep in mind, it's not going to stop at $15 because that CPI factor. It's going to go up. I don't know. It could easily go up another $1 per year every year after that, because of that effect I talked about. Once you get to $15, prices are going to go up. That's going to cause the CPI to go up, which means automatically it's going to trigger the clause in this legislation to raise minimum wage again. And just rinse, wash, repeat.
And pretty soon it's going to be $100 minimum wage.
Yeah, and then I don't see how that helps anybody.
I'll tell you what, let's take a quick break, and when we come back, I want to talk a little bit about restaurants.
Okay.
Buying a home is a big accomplishment, and we enjoy being part of that, especially for first-timers. The excitement of being approved and knowing they were building their future in their new home. All over the county, you will find homeowners who received the funds they needed from us. I'm Alan Hyatt, chairman of Severn Bank, and I tell you nothing means more to our bank or me than helping home buyers. Last week, I drove by a house and saw kids playing in the front yard. I recall how excited their parents were when they found out that the home was going to be theirs. So if it's a home, an addition, or a renovation, see us at Severn. You'll find affordable home loans, great service, a commitment to our community, and an enthusiastic team to help you. Severn Bank, here with you.
Online at severnbank.com. Member FDIC, equal housing lender. All loans subject to credit approval. Severn Bank is a trade name used by Severn Savings Bank.
Join WRNR for the 7th Annual Holistic Health Fair, Saturday, February 16th at the Hotel Annapolis. Find healing and health through a more natural approach with displays and demos for everything from Pilates to pet therapy. Plus, healthy living and wellness experts will be on site for group and one-on-one sessions. Interested in a healthier lifestyle? Join us at the 7th Annual WRNR Holistic Health Fair. Details at WRNR.com.
And we're back. I've got another beer, and you passed on the water because you're driving.
Yeah, only one per day for me.
I hate water. I just bored Jared with my long story about how I quit Diet Coke. And he was very encouraging, but I saw that pitying look in his eye going, good for you. Good for you that you're not drinking soda.
Right. It's a step.
It's a baby step.
Yeah.
Shit all the time, though.
We have a multiple step program for Tim here. We're trying to get him on. Quitting the Diet Coke was step one.
And then crack's next. I am going to cut back on that.
We're going to try to get Tim to the gym.
I go to Pip Moyer a lot. Just...
yeah, but for yourself.
Oh, I gotcha. Yeah. Dropping off the kids.
Yeah,
I walk down the stairs. I don't take the elevator.
Yeah, good for you.
I like people watch some woman. She was downstairs dropping off her kid. She took the elevator up and then went over to the stair machine.
That's funny.
I'm not kidding.
All right, so public, I need your help. Get Tim to the gym.
Yeah, we got to do some sort of contest with John. He goes all the time, though.
Did I tell you about the time I was at the gym stretching? I look in the corner, I see some tickets to something, and I thought, it was to the boat show, I think.
Just tickets lying there.
And I texted John, like, is this one of your promos? Like, are you doing a giveaway today? He's like, yeah, you just won. Anyway.
Yeah, just stretch and tickets.
Yeah, that's
if I win tickets to stuff, I go to the gym all the time.
It's so nice to win something unexpected, right?
Yeah, I gotta get back to the gym. I feel like crap.
Yeah, you do.
Anyway, so we were talking about the minimum wage, and the one thing that we were talking about, we were supposed to have Walter Vasquez here from Sin Fronteras, but his daughter caught a flat, so he had to turn around and go back. So he says. But the reason I wanted to talk about it is because when we're talking about retail, I think it's a different animal than restaurants and that whole model. And you and I babbled on about this a long time the other day on the phone with you because I am anti-tipping. I tip very well. I do. I had 2 beers. I'm going to tip probably 50% on those beers, maybe 60%.
I've seen you tip. You are a good tipper.
But I don't, in principle, I just resent the fact that I am covering the cost of labor directly because I don't see why the cost of running a business is different than the cost of running retail. And I'm probably wrong because I'm wrong most of the time.
It's a silly argument to me, no offense, but because you're
right.
if their wages were built into the prices, you'd also be paying for their labor. This just empowers you to tip differently whether you got good service or bad service.
Right. I'm just trying to mull that over now. Because the threat from the restaurateurs, because they talked about this, I think, what was his name? Kane? What was the guy who was running for president?
Oh.
He owned
you went in a different direction
Pizza?
than I expect you too.
Not Dean Kane. He's like the born-again Christian Superman guy.
I don't know who you're referring to.
He was...
What's your point? Let's go to the point.
John?
John told me.
So the point was that his argument was, and the argument in general, is that if you eliminate tipping, then the cost of your meal is going to go up. And my argument is, fine. It's a push for the diners because the cost of the meal should go up commensurate to what you would tip anyway. So if they say, well, we'll raise the price 20%, fine. I'm already tipping 20%, so for me, it's the same. Now, the servers, I think almost all of them would say, well, wait a minute, we would make less than we do now. And then I would say, okay, are you paying taxes on everything that you're making? Because if not, then we're paying our share of taxes and you're not, and you're making more money I mean, not that I begrudge anyone living. I don't want anyone to spit in my food. Please don't spit in my food.
Well, there are other examples. You were talking about other examples earlier. In Denmark, the waiters don't get tips.
No, we go to Ireland all the time, and they know we're Yanks because they get gleeful when we tip.
So I was listening to a podcast, and it was a different podcast than yours. I apologize.
I see.
Yeah. So it was a woman who went from England to Denmark and experienced among other things, just a totally different experience with the restaurant experience, where no one was rushed. There wasn't a...
Where did they tip in the UK?
They tip in the UK, but not in Denmark. Okay. So that was her change in experience. So in the restaurants, it was a low-pressure environment. Everything was much slower, and it was easygoing, which she enjoyed, but she also realized there wasn't a special effort to get that extra tip either.
Right.
And it was a sacrifice, but she overall enjoyed the differences. But I don't think that's what people in this country want to go to. They don't want to go to that model. They like the tipping model. And again, personally, I'm not arguing for or against, but the restaurateurs that I heard testifying against it were very fearful that with a high increase in minimum wage and taking out the tip wage exclusion, which is what the current legislation proposes, that
so it would essentially exclude restaurants.
Right. So they would have to go up. It would not exclude. They would take away the exclusion, where restaurants would now, for the first time, have to pay the same minimum wage as everybody else.
So I didn't know that. That's part of this legislation?
Yes.
Oh, that's a sea change.
Yes, it is.
All right. All right. So no one be mad at me. I was just talking hypothetically. I didn't know it was going to really happen.
Yeah. So this is what's the HB 166 is a $15 minimum wage hike over a few years, but it's they call it clean. There's no exceptions, no changes. So for restaurants, they'd have to go from whatever their current low minimum wage is. It's well below the $10 an hour now. They'd have to go to $15 per hour, which the restaurateurs all say would mean that they would have to increase prices significantly. They'd have to change their model to their prices would go up. So their expectations is that their clientele would not tip, and as a result, the waiters and waitresses would make a lot less money, and their model would end up going to more automation. They would end up having runners and busboys. So you would put in your food, and you wouldn't have that dedicated waiter and waitress like you do now experience. So restaurants are freaking out about this. And by the way, there were a lot of waiters and waitresses there to testify against it too, because they like making a lot more than $15 an hour now, and they were concerned that they would lose their wages.
And that's where, look, I mean, aside from the mechanics behind the economics of it, is that if I go to a high-end restaurant and you have impeccable service, that's part of the experience. So if I go to Lunas, I'm going to pay a lot more, but the service at Lunas is just phenomenal.
Right.
And I agree with that. You go to a restaurant and people phone it in, and they're like, where's my 20%? And I'm just like, well, wait a minute.
So I had an interesting conversation while I was there with a restaurateur, someone we both know, but I won't mention his name because I'm going to try to paraphrase him. He owns a wonderful restaurant in town. Where's
it located?
In Annapolis, and it's in between McDonald's and Lunasis. So it's kind of that family restaurant style restaurant.
I think meant physically. Like we're narrowing it down.
Yeah. So his point was that those high-end restaurants aren't going to really change their model with a huge minimum wage increase. That those restaurants, they're still going to have that high-touch, high-feel experience for the dining experience that you just described. On the low end of speed of service, the fast food restaurants are going to just get more automated. It's that family restaurant that's going to suffer the most.
So you're talking like a Green Turtle or just that
type of place.
That burger place sort of situation.
Right.
Well, so according to a new study by Harvard Business School, it said that $1 increase in the minimum wage leads to a 14% increase in the likelihood of a closure for an average restaurant. Mm-hmm. I think that 70%, this is an old maximum, but like 70% of restaurants go under within 2 years, something like that.
Yeah.
That's one of those things you
not
just
my industry, so I'm not familiar, right?
But I mean, but still, so if you say that's a 14% increase, a $1 increase, now we're talking about
almost $4.
More than $4.
Just slightly under. Well, initially just under $4, and then after the CPI increases, like we talked about, it'll go past $15.
So you would say, all right, exponentially, that means it's going to put half the restaurants under. I don't know how math works because I'm a journalism major.
I think we can all say we don't know exactly what the impacts are going to be, whether to my business, restaurant business, big business, small business. But you can't say that there aren't going to be impacts. So some businesses will have fewer employees. Some businesses will have fewer entry level. Some businesses will cut the high pay guys so that they can afford to have the entry level. Some businesses won't know how to handle it and they'll just go out of business. There will be significant consequences. and an increase of $4 all at once. And when I say all at once, I mean in one piece of legislation, is a huge increase. And so that's such a dramatic move. I don't understand why you wouldn't take it more incrementally. Especially right now, we are in a period of inflation that hasn't been sort of recognized by the general public. With these tariffs that have been going on with China, the cost of goods, steel and products that have been imported, all those raw goods and sometimes finished goods that are coming in from overseas, the costs are going up. When you go to the grocery store, you see your grocery bill is going up significantly. So we're already on the beginning parts of this huge inflationary period with more uncertainty ahead of us.
Which is what happens when you don't raise interest rates. I mean, I'm not an economist, obviously. I wouldn't be doing this. But I mean, from what I understand is that you have to cool off an economy. We're a hot economy right now. Economy is great. Some would call it a sugar high. People much more learned than I would. And then say that you have to raise interest rates and to cool that economy off, or else you get a runaway inflation. And there's someone who knows more than I do is just howling at their iPhone right now, saying that's not how it works. But that's how I understand how it works. And again, the trade war we're in that is under most people's radar. Right. You're seeing the good of steel, plastics, produce. All these things are creeping up, and we're the frogs in the boiling water right now. Right. But you add labor to that, and especially to a small business.
Exactly. So we just went through 4 years of minimum wage increases. Let's just settle in for a little bit. And again, I'm not trying to dismiss or ignore that there are real problems with income disparity, but I suggest that there are other causes. It's not that because minimum wage is where it is. It's because we had our tax cut structure. It's because of how we, as a government, spend our money and who we as people, who we elect, and the policies that they're going to enact. So it's a much more complicated problem than you're going to solve with minimum wage. It's a broad brush solution to an inartful solution.
You know what? We're going to do a quick aside right now because you just reminded me of something that I want to argue about, and I don't know if I'm right or not. And it was the Trump tax cut. Mm-hmm. I don't know what it means to us yet. We haven't talked to our accountant, which we probably should have a while ago. We didn't change our withholding. We didn't do any of that. So they say right now, that's the articles are saying that right now the initial tax returns are down 8% from last year. And so you're like, the tax cut not only did it not help people, but now they actually are getting less than they did last year. Other people saying, well, hold up. You got to look at you're paying less taxes per paycheck. So you have to look at your W-2 and compare that, add that to your refund. Where am I on this before I start arguing with something?
I think a lot of people don't know how the tax cut affected them. I think there are a lot of big companies that have the specialists on board to tell them exactly how. And
they did great.
It was.
I mean, I think we can say the tax cuts helped large companies. Right. Did not do what was predicted to happen, and you could argue that. But when it gets to the smaller businesses and the individual, that's where you're like, I don't know.
Well, here's the change for a lot of businesses. A lot of small businesses, as a result of the tax cut, will change from a C corporation to an S corporation. And that has to do with pass-through expenses.
I should do that.
The net result of that is that there's going to be less tax revenue generated to the federal government. And while we have this ballooning deficit, we're going to have shrinking tax revenues from a lot of businesses. Where does that leave us as a country? Further in debt.
So you're going to be tax hikes at some point
there's a lot of complicating factors, again, that are causing and I'm not so clear on what problem is trying to be addressed with this minimum wage. I think it's income disparity, but I'm not really sure.
Well, this has been coming around for a long time.
It's copycat legislation. Other jurisdictions are going to $15 an hour, like New York and California. So why don't we do it too? It's like a liberal bandwagon, if you will. Mm-hmm. Instead of really thinking it through of saying, why is $15 the right number for Maryland? Where does that number come from? Just because other people pick $15, that's what we're going to pick? It doesn't seem like a great argument.
And frankly, if you look at legislation, there's a lot of our legislators who are small business owners. So I'm a little surprised by that.
Well, I think most are not. And frankly, the ones who are the
powerful ones are.
The committee hearing that I was in, the ones who were business owners or referred to themselves as business owners were against the legislation.
I know all business groups are. And this is where, like you said, that this is part of that progressive ticket. It's part of the package, is that you have to say. And I would be, and I'm not progressive and I'm not liberal. I try to explain whoever I annoy the most, I'll be left of center.
You mean antagonist to that person?
Yeah, but I am left of center, but not far left because I'm pragmatic. And this is something that, again, if I was younger and you asked me about this on its face, sure, I support it. And it wasn't until I started talking to people and I got to know a lot of small business owners, and most of them were just barely squeaking by. Mm-hmm. And this is going to really kill a lot of them. So, I mean, like you say, I want to see disparity addressed, because I don't think there's ever in history been such a hindrance to upward mobility than it has in the last 10 years.
And it tends not to go well. When you get to such huge income disparities and you have the really rich and the really poor, it tends not to go well for that empire, if you will.
You would think.
Right.
But I mean, I think there's got to be ways to address this. And I think this is maybe a little ham-handed, because I don't think anyone really studied this to any great extent. I changed my mind on it when I was doing the research for this, and actually I did do some research for this. Yeah, I know, right? This is what happened when John's not involved. It was just a lot of the small business owners who I saw who were just kind of panicked by it. Right. I talked to a couple people last night who own pizzerias, or who own, these are guys who are, I don't say young guys, but they're not, they're my age. And I said, what are you going to do? And they said, we're not sure. They shrugged. I said, if it goes through, what's your plan? They said, we don't have a plan. We don't know what it means. We're not going to know until we get into it.
My hope is that if the Maryland legislature is going to pursue this, and it appears like they're going to do it, they build in some exceptions and exclusions. Number one, I'm not a restaurateur, but as I understand it, getting the tip wage exclusion back in makes sense, but that's not my issue. I think small businesses should be excluded because, the percent of payroll for a small business is significantly higher than for a big box.
And how do you define small?
I would say under 50 employees, but you could. I think that's the Health Care Act uses small as 50 employees. 50, yeah. So that's where I got that from. The second exclusion I advocate for is excluding under 21-year-olds and over 55-year-olds. The under 21s hopefully is obvious from our discussion that it protects entry-level wages at a reasonable amount to compensate somebody for the amount of productivity that they can provide. The over 55, my thought process along the lines of this: if you're over 55 and you've done well for your career, you're not making minimum wage, this doesn't apply to you. I have seen in my store and other places plenty of instances where there's someone who is retired from their main job and is just looking for something else to do in sort of after they're retired. They don't necessarily want to do as much as someone who is getting paid higher and be more productive. So they're happy to have a job, and we're happy to have somebody with some more experience, but might not necessarily put in the same level of energy or hours. And that's not to say all people of that age, just there have been instances. The third change I would make, again, is referring to what I was talking about earlier, where the government, instead of either burdening small employers or businesses in general with yet another social program, whether it's healthcare or retirement or anything else, make this a government program directly as opposed to through businesses. Or if it has to be through an employer, create a tax subsidy, or it couldn't be a credit because most businesses pay a lot more in labor, or would pay a lot more going from $11 to $15 an hour than they pay in taxes. So it couldn't just be a tax credit, but there has to be some sort of subsidy or reimbursement of some sort to help businesses do that.
All right, so you got a lot of legislation passed, and you started off as a novice and ended up as a pretty wily and savvy negotiator.
Your words, not mine.
Well, other people who were, and one of it was said kind of ruefully. But that said, how does this work behind the scenes? So is there a compromise built in? Like, they asked for all these things, and they said, look, we're going to put this out, and we're going to give in on the tip exclusion. Is this stuff built in to, you have to have enough fat to trim to make everyone look good?
Right. So certainly there is a constituent or a group that would say no to that they want this clean version, as they call it, with no exclusions. I gotta think, logic tells me that what you just said is the case, though, that for a lot of people, they want to go at the most harsh way, and then there's room to compromise where they can build these things in, maybe not go to $15, maybe it's $13, maybe it's over a longer period of time, maybe you just do 2 years and then you pause and reevaluate, see the impact. I mean, to me, that's just taking an incremental approach like that is just a lot more reasonable, and usually reasonable minds prevail, so I'm hoping that's what it is.
Did this get to the floor last year, or did it get killed in committee? So this is the second year, right?
I'm not an expert, and I'm not positive. I think the way you said it was accurate. That it's the second year, and that got killed in committee last year.
I mean, it's inevitable. It's going to happen. I mean, in Maryland, which is the second most Democratic state in the union, it's going to happen at some point. So if it doesn't happen this year, it's going to happen next year. If not, I mean, it's eventually. But you just hope it's a watered down version of some sort. Or it's
Well, frankly, I think that
because Hogan opposes it, obviously.
I think that's the case. I'm not trying to be the expert.
He said Hogan worries a pay raise for all workers hurt small businesses.
Right. I've heard him express concern about it. I haven't heard him say he would vote against it or read that he said that. So as far as what I'm hoping for, frankly, having it withdrawn or voted down would be my preference. If it was going to move forward, though, I think it needs a lot of work.
Now, this can be done. I mean, this has been done. We were just talking about that in Montgomery County. It's happened in...
With exclusions.
And it's happened in
Prince George's,
and I don't know enough about it.
They also had exclusions, including for the younger workers, entry level.
But both are very blue counties. Mm-hmm. Anne Arundel County is purple. Very, we are a blue sandwich in between two reds.
Sure.
South County and North County. So would you foresee the council taking this up at any point? Or is there any wisdom to that?
I got to really hope that this, whether you're talking about the county council or the city council, that they stay far away from this. It's bad enough that when you're dealing with state line issues, whether someone is on the border of Pennsylvania or West Virginia, it would get even uglier if you were talking about intercounty. Now, here's a thought for you, which I also considered that we haven't discussed. If you think that there should be some minimum wage increase and it should be different based on what county, because on the edge of Pennsylvania and West Virginia, you're competing with states with, say, $7 minimum wages, and say in Howard County or Montgomery County, you could afford to pay much higher.
You can't in Garrett or Washington or Allegheny.
Right. So instead of drawing bright lines along the county borders, it would be a lot more difficult, but a lot more effective and fair if it was much more gradated or gradated. Okay, so that it wasn't a bright line that went from, say, $15 in this county and the next county over it's $10. You don't want some that drastic of a change from a stone's throw away, essentially. But if it was gradual from like the heart of one county, slowly going down as you go across the state, then as a business owner, you wouldn't be so inclined to move your business 2 miles in any one direction to try to be in one county or out of another county or in one state or out of another state.
Can you think about the nightmare that is?
It's a huge nightmare.
No, but I was thinking about Forest. We're sitting on Forest Drive here at Caliente, and the city ends a block that way. But depending where you are on Forest Drive,
that's exactly my point.
You are in the county or you're in the city. It's just like you have businesses next to each other.
Right.
You have county, then there's a business that's city, then business that's county again.
So wouldn't it be great if government was so much smarter, so that you wouldn't have these bright line differences on which side of the street you were on or which block? If there was more of a graduation down or up for different wages, depending on the other factors, whether you want to do it on, I don't know what, tax revenue perhaps. You'd have to have some benchmark as that number went up in Montgomery County or down in Garrett County, the wages would follow up or down with it.
I was just thinking about this too. So we have, mostly Ocean City, but to a lesser extent Deep Creek. So we have some seasonal workers because those are seasonal areas. Mm-hmm. Do you think that this would affect seasonal towns like that differently? Because you have essentially 3 months to make your money in Ocean City. So if you go to a Grotto's or you go to the Crab Bag or somewhere in Ocean City, you got to bear in mind they have 3, maybe 3.5 months essentially of prime season that they have to make their money, and they got to pay their rent for the next 9 months on that.
Well, again,
let me tell you this: the Crab Bag, and this what irritates me, and I'm calling them out right now because I've done it on Facebook. The Crab Bag, who's in the restaurant in Ocean City, they put a surcharge on their checks. So when you get your check, it's a 3%, 2.5-3% surcharge. And they say because the price of food and drink varies, we're putting the surcharge on. So there's your check, there's the 2 to 3%, and then you have to tip on top of that.
Right.
That has nothing to do with what we're talking about.
Right.
I just wanted to put it out there.
So again, there's so many different types of businesses, and you just highlighted a different type, the seasonal and beach.
And you have a whole city that depends on it.
And so there are so many different types of business. That's why a broad brush, $15 for everyone doesn't make sense, because it has huge impacts in different ways for different types of businesses. And that's why I say this should be more of a government program of, instead of every business owner has to react to this, have the government figure out who they're trying to give more money to, and the government give them that money and have it supported by the general tax base.
Well, frankly, I'm just hoping that it's voted down so I don't have to pay John more because, frankly, he's not pulling his weight. He's not here tonight.
How about that?
No, he's probably home, and he's watching our Facebook page to see if anyone's checked in, because we have a Facebook page and a group. Did you know that we have a Facebook page and a group?
I did know that, Mr. Hamilton.
Know that.
Yeah.
And you can find us at MD Crabs. No, we're at MD Crabs Podcast on Twitter. See, I quit Twitter, so I just don't. I don't even know what we are anymore. Although I totally cheat. I look like I use our account to see what the trends are, but I just can't comment anymore because that's bad.
Right.
We're at the info at themarylandcrabs.com. We're at themarylandcrabs.com, and you can subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts and Google Play, and play us on Alexa, and all those things that John did. Jared, I kept you up super late tonight, and my night is just beginning because I'm all pumped up, but you were great, and thanks for coming out. I really appreciate that.
I appreciate that. I appreciate you having me on the show, and if people want to reach out and have a dialogue with me, I'd be happy to hear from them.
Right, and you can find him at K&B True Value here on Forest Drive.
Yep.
And where his employees will help you because they are...
a point I want to make is, business, a lot of business, certainly my business, we have a transparent business. So my managers see profit, they see revenue, and they see salaries. I hope, I got to think that that the employees that work at K&B True Value would also be concerned about a minimum wage increase, because they know the same numbers that I see, and be concerned, where's that money going to come from and who's going to lose their jobs as a result of it.
So you don't want to panic them. So legislature... Right. Think about that.
Please.
You make Jared's life easier. Jared, your water's on me.
Thanks, Tim. Always a pleasure.
This has been the Maryland Crabs Podcast with Tim Hamilton and John Fernay. Sure to follow them at all the regular places, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and online at themarylandcrabs.com. Take a moment to rate us on iTunes. Now, get the hell out of my kitchen. Seriously, go!
You're still here? It's over. Go home. Go.